And Steve Norris joins me at absolutely no expense. Steve, we wouldn't like to waste the fee. Before you were, or while you were cut off, I was making the point that Rishi Sunak walked on water just a few months ago. And now I'm seeing briefings and sniping against him all over the place. What's happened?
Well, I think the interesting thing is that there are two Tory parties now. There's the Tory party that you might call, if you like, inspired by Thatcher, believes in a low-tax economy, believes that the state should withdraw from many of the activities in which it could otherwise be engaged. And for those people, and Sunak is probably closer to them than he is to the other side of this debate, for those sort of people, what's going on at the moment financially is appalling. This is no longer a Tory party, I hear a lot of my friends say. On the other hand, there are those who say, look, we've just been through a pandemic. Last year, the government spent close on £400 billion, as you well know. And therefore, right now, we have to do a few things to stimulate the economy, to get that growth going. And of course, in particular, to make sure that we start the process of levelling up. And that's going to mean higher taxes, higher spending, and not something you might traditionally associate with Conservatives. I think worrying about Rishi Sunak's profile is kind of missing the point. There's a deeper thing going on here, George, which is, as I say, this sense in which the Tory party is finding itself divided on this crucial issue of just what does the party stand for these days.
Well, Boris Johnson, of course, stands for all things to all men. He's been through multiple phases, and I know that you have been critical of him in the past, as I have. As Rishi Sunak rose, it seemed to me that Boris Johnson began to fall. Sunak falling doesn't seem correspondingly to have seen a rise in shares of Boris Johnson. Is that how it seems to you?
Yeah, it does. But I think, George, to be fair, you've been in politics long enough. You and I, pretty much the same number of years. I don't read too much into this. I think there's no doubt that, Sunak, for example, is seen by many Tories as the obvious heir apparent to Boris Johnson. And Boris, like most leaders, probably doesn't actually care too much for people who are too close to him and are being talked about as their successor. So there'll be some tensions there. But the real tensions are actually among, many of the members of Parliament, particularly on the Conservative benches, who do see this dichotomy between the old traditional Tory, as I say, kind of Thatcherite, if you like, low tax, low spend economy, get the state out of your life, give you more of your life back, control more of your own life, and so on. Much of that, I might say, I have some sympathy with myself. And those who say, in the wake of the pandemic, where we spent an incalculable amount of money, as most countries around the world did, in order to try and stem the impact of the pandemic, we now are facing a different paradigm. We made a great virtue of austerity. And when opposition parties complained about austerity, we said, well, look, we've got to get spending under control. This was very much the George Osborne line. Nowadays, I think there's another, if you like, another proposition out there, which is maybe we do need to start spending more. Maybe we do need a higher wage economy. And that particularly, of course, is true for those of us like you and me, both of whom who voted for Brexit, on the basis that we did not want to mainline on cheap Eastern European labour again. And we wanted to actually increase the wealth of our own people, particularly in the north of England. That's where the real dichotomy lies, I think, in the Tory party.
It is a fascinating dichotomy, and neither is it a false one. It's very real, as you describe. But it's really a trichotomy now, because what we have is a group of people in the Conservative Party that appear to have taken their marching orders from Greta Thunberg. The Tory David Cameron hugged a hoodie, but he also hugged a husky. But a section of the Tory party now seems to have gone rather green at the gills.
You could say that as a very good description. I mean, my own personal view of Greta is that she's a well-meaning young lady, but it really is quite extraordinary that she gets the amount of attention she gets. I mean, she has a point of view, of course, but there are others who point out that in pursuit of, of a carbon-free economy by 2030, 2040, 2050, whichever date you choose, this country is imposing an enormous cost on itself. And when you consider that we already have one of the best records globally in terms of addressing climate change, and that, Mr. Xi, who isn't actually going to be at COP26, and Mr. Putin, who isn't going to be at COP26, both could arguably be far worse offenders than the UK in terms of the impact of climate change. There are some of us who say, can we get a little bit of realism back to this debate? I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask, George. I mean,
I agree with that. But it's your leader that says we have to lead the world on it. We produce 1% of the world's emissions. Why should we be at zero come 2050? Although I've got to tell you, after our long life in politics, Steve, I don't trust anybody that tries to predict what's going to happen a year come January, never mind in 2050. When I hear people making promises about what they're going to do by 2070, I must say I laugh.
Well, I won't be alive to find out either. That's, we're at that sort of age, you and I. But no, seriously, I actually agree with you. You see, I do think that we have done well. It's not just that we're 1%. After all, we're a relatively small island when you compare us with other vast land masses. It's that we've actually already taken a great many steps to reduce the impact of carbon. We've massively increased the amount of renewable energy that we generate, and we're now not quite free of reliance on coal, but very, very close to it. This is all good stuff. And therefore, you have to ask yourself, is Boris's enthusiasm merely for the cameras around COP26? He is, after all, if you like, on the world stage. I wouldn't personally put too much...
Heaven forfend that Boris Johnson would just be doing something for the cameras. At least not climbing up on one of those chairlifts and getting stuck. Well, thanks, Steve. I'm sorry it was so short this evening. Hope to talk to you again soon.